Hello everyone, I am Manolis Elijah Sueuga. I'm a composer and I'm also the curatorial fellow here at EMPAC. And I have the pleasure today of introducing an artist and a good friend, Armando Guadalupe Cortés. Armando is a Brooklyn-based multidisciplinary artist, originally from Urequío, a small community in Michoacán, Mexico. His work explores themes of endurance and repetitive labor through object making, storytelling, and performance, which employs forms and methods from his native hometown in Mexico and contrasts them with elements of his life from the United States. Armando is a 2021 graduate of Yale's MFA program, where his focus was on sculpture. His work has been featured in many exhibitions, including the Craft Contemporary in Los Angeles, ASU Art Museum, the White Cube in London, Space One in South Korea, Jenkins and Johnson projects in Brooklyn, the Tarbell Arts Center in Charleston, Illinois, and recently MASS MoCA's ongoing exhibition, Ceramics in the Expanded Field. In recent years, Armando has been awarded the Franklin Furnace Fellowship in New York City for 21 to 22. He's completed the St. Elmo Arts Residency and Fellowship in Austin, Texas, the Tiger Strikes Asteroid Artist Residency in New York, and is currently an artist in residence at Field Projects, New York, as of 2023. It's also just been announced that he's one of the artists for the Sheds Open Call Commission Program in New York for the 2022 to 23 cycle. So I want to say that I first encountered Armando's work approximately a year ago at MASS MoCA when the ceramics exhibition I mentioned first opened. Particularly, I was drawn to a work called El Descanso en la Gloria. I was struck by the way that this work, this video installation, utilized space and sound, specifically where sequences of silence are startled by the shattering of ceramic vessels, which we'll see a bit later. His work, Castillos, of the same exhibition, is a cedar adobe structure, a series of structures, really, which seems to exist somewhere between architecture and sculpture. Armando activates this work in performances, sometimes in collaboration with his brother Huve, and recently with me, in a performance piece that focused specifically on dryness. So welcome, Armando, and let's begin with a bit of background. If you could tell all of us a little bit about who you are as an artist, a bit about how you began your practice, what inspired you maybe in recent years.
Yeah, thank you for that, Elijah. That's very generous words, a great intro. Thank you all for being here. Let's see how I began my practice. It's like all artists, it was kind of a turbulent start. I did undergrad in art, left art school, was lacking all of the facilities, was lacking all of that support, but found ways to make it happen. For a few years, didn't make a whole lot of work, but pretty quickly, within 2-3 years, I had that itch, that need to make, and to make things that were outside of the art school model, make work that did not feel assignment-based, which was all of my work up until then, up until about 2015. Everything I made still felt like it carried that weight of being in classroom. So it's not till 2015, 2016, I start making things that feel like they are my own, that the projects are coming into having my own voice, my own kind of, my own self being put into them. And that started, I started making those works around that time, 7-8 years ago now. But really, my kind of, my becoming an artist really started as a young age. You mentioned I'm from Mexico originally, so I grew up with a lot of folks around me who would make things out of necessity, oftentimes, but they brought a lot of creativity and ingenuity to make up for maybe the lack of materials or lack of resources. And so I grew up with this kind of motto of just make what you need. And later on, I was fortunate enough to go to art school. And I was just surrounded by folks who were like incredibly giving. They shared everything I ever wanted to know, any question I had, technical, conceptual. They were super open. There were people, mentors all the way from, my high school art teacher, who I always give a shout out to, Arnaldo Vargas. Other mentors like Mario Ibarra Jr., still also an LA-based artist, but pretty renowned around the world. And then, my ceramics professor, Adrian Sachs, a good friend also, Shoshi Watanabe, who always made my work possible by allowing me to use facilities, allowing me just space to make. But it's, I mentioned it was kind of tumultuous. In the green room, I was mentioning to Elijah that for a few years and for a few works, including the image you see up here, I would actually sneak back into school. I got a door code from someone, and I would sneak back in to film things whenever I needed just like a white cube. So it was a lot of work, a lot of hustle, I guess. But that's kind of how I became an artist. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a nice background to situate us a little bit. And I want to actually just dive into showing folks one of your works that I was very attracted to when I first saw it. And it is called Aún los gallos lloran. So we will, bear with me. And I want to kind of use this to begin maybe the next set of conversation. kind of draw our attention not just to that performance, but also some of these elements that are very much kind of apparent at a glance when we're watching that video. And similar works of yours, Armando, also that incorporate these kinds of little totems and objects that are really fascinating. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit maybe about the creation of works like Aún los gallos lloran, and maybe a bit about how you select objects like this and how that kind of ties into these kinds of works, because you have a number of works that kind of run along a similar vein.
Yeah, this performance and this install are really kind of, I guess overall my works have become sort of a body of work. And so this is very in line with some works, some pieces where I'm kind of equating animal and human, and particularly like my body or brown body in the space of the beast of burden. With this piece, it's kind of this placing it into the arena for spectacle, for even blood sport. The title alludes to that, Aún los gallos lloran. It translates to even roosters cry, and so it's kind of this reference to like the cockfight, this blood sports, right, where a lot of male bravado and posturing takes place, where a lot is perpetuated and projected, I should say, into the animal. I mean, if you read into like the rules of it, it's quite interesting, like how gendered it is, how much there is of these really silly kind of rules of what bravery versus strength mean in the rooster, and how they are either male or female traits. And so the work really is this male bravado posturing, but it's not so much facing off against my collaborator, my brother in this case, Juve, but it's about kind of this balancing act, and this kind of this working against the stage, not so much against each other. But this work really started with another piece titled Pata Rajada, which was kind of, in a way, actually the opposite of this. That work, I was thinking about the potential for falling into pure spectacle, of becoming like the entertainment for an opening for the show. And so I was being reached out to, and you know, by spaces, curators, and there was this kind of real want for me to just come and perform the thing, be this I don't know, this labor, I guess, that, and some of the pieces we'll see that they are that, but for different reasons. And so just before Aún los gallos lloran, I created this piece, Pata Rajada, which had all of like kind of the hints of this standoff of the Pelea de Gallos, but it was all about the denial of it. So here, rather than have the stage, it was actually the seating arena for that ring that was built. Only it was cut in half, and it's pushed against the gallery wall. And so as the viewer, you're forced to look to the underworkings of it, these understructures. And within there, I kind of place all of these objects that then evolve and reappear in castillos. And to get back to the question, that's where these objects kind of start entering the work, and then they show up in castillos in a more mature way. In Pata Rajada, they were almost experimental in some cases, but others were a little more solidified. And they all come from either personal or kind of historical moments, sometimes both. Sometimes it's my answer to an existing object. Sometimes it's kind of this, I mentioned earlier, this making, this finding a way to create something when you don't have the right material, the right mean, just a little bit of ingenuity. But it's also a bit of just by making the object, kind of imbuing some power into it, in a way making charms, like this small piece that's on screen at the moment. Did I answer that? Or did I go on a tangent?
Yeah, well, tangents are great too, but I think you got at it. Yeah, I think, and in addition to these particular objects that feel very personal, and kind of have this sense of interiority, I'm also just thinking a lot, of course, about the structures that house these objects, which also feel like they they have these histories to them, and I'd love if you could talk a little bit about these structures themselves, kind of the architecture, what's happening with, well, how are you thinking about architecture in your work, and how does that kind of, manifest for you in these?
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about it in a number of ways. But maybe to backtrack a little bit, I'm thinking of another work which we have images of. But I think about it in a number of ways. One of which is kind of like my interest in archaeology. I don't think I regret it, but I always wanted to like do another major in anthropology, archaeology, something in that field. But there's this interest in kind of like digging up, but not so much digging up, kind of in this. Well, it's both. It's this long view of everything before us, but it's also this view of it as in what's in the backyard, what's most recently here, and so that's always kind of something that I'm interested in seeing, or maybe in a way thinking about future archaeology. What does it look like or what will the future record look like? What do the structures that I grew up in look like now? How are they changing, and how will they continue to change? And when I think about architecture in that sense, it's kind of an ongoing process, something we see, maybe not immediately, but occasionally it strikes us. We see buildings within our neighborhood change. We see them be layered up and be built on top of one another. This was the piece I was kind of alluding to. But with all of that, with this idea of archaeology and architecture, I'm also thinking of not just movement into the ground and what's beneath us. I'm also thinking of the way we see change as we move geographically. I guess, I mean, it's a very personal take, but I think a lot about the way moving from Urequío, my hometown, to the LA area where I grew up in Wilmington, seeing that change in the scenery, but in the way people respond to that landscape in terms of the materiality that they build with and the style that they build with. So that's that's super interesting to me, the way architecture is determined kind of by the places we inhabit, by what's available there. And in a way, I'm thinking about it in terms of migratory routes, but also not just one way, not just linear, but the way they return back. I mentioned seeing things change, and in my hometown, it's kind of like I see the style of building change from when I was a kid to now. Whereas I grew up in an adobe home, now everything is rebar, concrete, and brick, and the styles are much bigger. I mean, the economics of the whole, like all of even rural Mexico, has been changing so much. But you see it reflected, and so that's kind of what I meant by seeing archaeology almost happening, where I'm like, whoa, this adobe house is gone, and right over it is this new cement construction. It's 2 stories tall. It's pretty interesting to me. And with some of the other pieces, you asked about the history of the structures. Maybe?
Yeah, even if. With like castillos, for example, there's, of course, this use of cedar and the adobe, and those 2 materials kind of combined. And maybe you could say a little bit about that, even for those who aren't so familiar with that work. I'll go back to it.
Oh, yeah, sure, we can. With castillos, it's those are kind of interesting pieces to me. They are very sculptural on their own, but for me, they were really about housing other objects, other materials. But to the point about the cedar and the adobe, and I'll add in there the form. They're really kind of this hybrid that I kind of came up with, but I came up with from observing, from watching the real world, and this architecture that I observe. It's really kind of a moment where I combined materials from different time periods, and where and also from different geographies. So adobe, I already mentioned, growing up in a home made of adobe, but then all of those homes are now being rebuilt in cement and rebar. And then the third element, the cedar, it's kind of like the wood construction that takes place further north and into the U.S. And with cedar, I don't know if people are familiar with it, but it's this super interesting history of cedar farming becoming a real big business, a big thing during like when settlers came into the Southwest, into Texas, Arizona, and the cedar farm owners were often the people in charge of like zoning boards or kind of just in power. And so it's very convenient that you now had to build with cedar. So it was, kind of this revolving mechanism for changing the traditional methods and making business while at it, and doing away with traditional building. And so here, with thinking of all of that, thinking of the movement from central Mexico into the north and eventually up here, I kind of combine those three elements: the cedar, the adobe, and the form. The form is really based off of the rebar skeleton that is built first, and then concrete is cast into. And in Spanish, at least down in Michoacán, we refer to it as castillo. It's literally translates to a castle. And so there's kind of this allusion to your own castle, but it's about that skeleton beneath these concrete. And again, here it's kind of just reimagined with these other moments, historical and geographical. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. And again, I think like I was talking to you earlier about this a little bit, but I'll just mention that these spaces feel so, they create kind of this sort of, reverence, and there's this sense of, especially with these small objects scattered around, respect and kind of holding space for these little individual things, regardless of our own connection with them, I think, in just the way that they're kind of scattered about the structure. I don't know, one of the things I find interesting, well, actually, maybe I'll get into this later, but maybe we'll actually switch gears and we'll talk a little bit about sound, and I want to kind of start that conversation with, again, the piece that I mentioned at the beginning, El Descanso en la Gloria, which I have here. Maybe this is it. Let's see. That's not it. And again, this piece really kind of was noticeable from, I was basically in an entirely different section of this gallery, and I noticed this piece from, I don't know, maybe 30 feet away, just because of the sonic element, which we'll see. it there. And the film is kind of ongoing, currently on exhibition still at MASS MoCA, but it plays in kind of a continuous loop. I think we saw most of it there, right? Yeah, so maybe just with respect to that, and then you can open it up to other works, but if you could just talk about the ways in which you were or weren't thinking about sound, and maybe just how you're thinking about sound in your work.
Yeah, with this piece, looking at it now, I guess I was thinking about sound. I thought I started later on, but maybe this is the first instance or the first couple of instances where I do think about it, where I'm kind of in this, it's not such a quiet space. There's a lot of like air ducts and things happening in the background. There's all this air systems, but otherwise it's just the crushing of the pots that's really present. And you mentioned your experience with it. You noticed the piece from 30 feet away or so. So it's really about like filling the space without really physically filling it. And so sound has more and more become that element to do that with. Yeah, with other works, I think I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking of sound as this very important byproduct, where we saw the clip of Aún los gallos lloran, and at least in the way I envisioned the work, it was really about this posturing, about the two men, about the stage. But then it became this thing of like, if there's stomping, if there's this dance thing going on, then there's going to be sound. And if there's this giant stage rocking, there's going to be sound. And so it's kind of these things that have been happening naturally, but that have been working really well so far. And now I'm kind of starting to be a little more attuned to them and consider them more. With the more recent works, I'm thinking about even like the voice as the materiality. I think later on we have a short clip of another performance on that same stage where I do use my voice. There is script, and it's this thing where I don't know. I forget what the writing is on, but there's kind of this writing and research into how we have different personas based on which language we are utilizing. And I've kind of been more aware of that when I speak Spanish, I'm kind of this different character. I'm a different person. At the moment, I'm very soft-spoken. I'm very, it's like, I don't know, it's a different character. And so here, with this piece, it's this was titled Mitotero. It's, I'm kind of using the voice and so the sound of the voice as a materiality, and in a way that relates or converts into two different characters via the sound. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to keep thinking about that, but I think we'll come back to it naturally. And it's interesting that you say you kind of maybe started off without sound at the forefront. But when I look at a lot of these works, sound seems so central, with even like the bells that you've constructed. And we can kind of see them here in Mitotero, and the way that we might get a chance to watch a little bit of this performance as well. But Armando, you're kind of moving around and sort of bringing the bells with you, which creates a very kind of, it's a very distinct sound. And of course, the bells are kind of, as we can see, they're kind of shattering on the stage throughout the performance. And there are all these, I think bells seem like such a motif in your work. I don't know, I want to come back to that more, but maybe we can talk first about just kind of the structure of the museum. I guess kind of one of the interesting things about El Descanso en la Gloria is this kind of significant contrast between you kind of in this crucifix position, a brown body against a white wall. And it makes me think of the Zora Neale Hurston essay from way back when she's describing when she most feels like a black woman is when she is standing against a white background. And in this piece, you're literally standing against this background. And anyway, it just makes me think of kind of the ways that institutions recreate spaces like that, and obviously the museum and the structure of the museum itself. And I'm wondering kind of in what ways you have felt challenged by maybe the structure of the museum, maybe in terms of sound and acoustics, and or maybe the architecture of these kinds of spaces themselves.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's always kind of this thing where I react to the space, I kind of work with it. But in retrospect, a lot of times I realize like, oh, that was quite a bit of a challenge. There was a confrontation and a reckoning with space. If maybe we can flip back to the images of the installation for Y La Gente. That was kind of one piece where that comes to mind, where it really was this kind of confrontation. At this museum, it was kind of a very interesting architecture, not on screen, but if you search it, this whole museum was really kind of like designed around Mesoamerican archaeological sites. So it was like a lot of columns and pyramid shapes, and it was very interesting. And so as I arrived and I'm given this kind of tour, all I kept thinking about was like the materiality of it and how it felt not quite right. And so my response was to rebuild fragments of the columns that were in the space already, which were these giant 2 by 2 foot cement columns that were like 10 feet high. But we built them at like half scale, so they were only 5 feet high. And again, to go back to a little bit about the interest in archaeology, it was this idea of just building these structures, but using like the local soils, using native clay, using actually clay that was being used, that was donated by local potters from the Gila River Reservation. All these moments of just recreating something and kind of taking it back in a way, using our own labor, our own hands to do so. In terms of other challenges or how I'm thinking about the sound and acoustics of it, it's again, that's kind of more recent for me. I guess that the biggest thing I notice now is if I am bringing a performance to the space, I do wonder about the materiality of like the floors and what's needed to layer up onto there. How do I make the space more friendly? And that's done in a, sometimes with just the floor with maybe some sort of stage, but it also comes into the architecture. How do we bring it back to not just a place of comfort, but a place where I'm creating something, I think you used the word, something that brings reverence. And so maybe this is the first moment of that, this recreation of the gallery pillars. And maybe the same is true for castillos, where they are kind of acting between sculpture and architecture, where the materials are taking over the existing pillars that hold up those ceilings, but they're being kind of consumed and in a way just creating a different space, a different sensibility, and allowing for physically to just place other objects on there. But I don't know, I think I have a question for you. Is it okay if I ask it?
Sure.
Yeah. Because I mean, as I've been pointing out, I hardly think about sound now. It's so recent, but with the conversations we've been having, you and I, the past year or so, it's become like super heightened for me. I'm very aware of it now and thinking about it more and more. So I'm curious about like your own work and how you respond to spaces that might be equally off-putting, maybe. I don't know if that's the right word.
Yeah, I mean, I think like for me, I want to create with sound and music just places that feel very personal, and so maybe like the stuff that I do is less conducive to like being played in a large room or something, and more for headphones. I think like it's much more personal, I think, and maybe made for walking through spaces that are special and in whatever way it is. Like I've had moments where, for example, I walk around one of my favorite places, or maybe like it's some Gothic revival kind of church or something like that, and I compose something that has the purpose of being listened to in a space like that or something. But again, still thinking about it being listened to in headphones. So maybe not necessarily disrupting in the same way. It's more of a kind of personal experience. Of course, it's the extent that you can really manipulate an environment with sound is that we don't really want to go down that wormhole, maybe. Yeah, but I don't know. I'll leave it at that for now because I don't have anything else so great to say about that.
Well, I'll just kind of interject real quick, if I may. It sounds like, similarly, I think we create things we revere and maybe love. I don't know if, it sounds cheesy, but things that you have a real connection to. The way you describe walking through a Gothic revival cathedral or something, wanting to create a sound for that, I think that's super nice. With just going back to the original question of being challenged by the structure or the space, it's kind of this thing of not so much focusing on how to push back, but just do our own thing, I think, if I can speak for both of us. Okay, that was all.
No, absolutely. I think I also wanted to, you kind of touched on reverberante a little bit ago in your answer, but I mean, that piece seems like it is so kind of imposing in a way just because, let me pull it up here, you're sort of manipulating the actual ground. Maybe I'm going the wrong way. Yeah, so with a piece like this, I wonder if you could just maybe talk a little about your process for this and how, with a work like this, you are or aren't trying to sort of impose on people's sort of personal space.
Actually, that's like a really good piece to what I was saying about maybe, what I gathered from your description of how you might respond to a space. And it goes to what I was saying about rather than fighting or pushing back and exhausting energy on that struggle, it's more about just creating something that I revere, that I respect and love, and bringing elements that can fill the space with that feeling, that emotion. I mean, just a little bit about this process for this piece. It was quite a bit of, like many of the work, spending time with family and listening to stories. In this case, spending time with younger family, my younger cousins, and figuring out that they're like growing into men, and they're figuring out like their life in the U.S. and potentially moving to Mexico, where they have never set foot before, up until their late teens when the family decided to move back. And so reverberante, just real quick, means reverberance. So it's this idea of this bouncing back and forth and going back to the point of, like, I don't know, I thought of it as a pebble in water, just bouncing back to that point of origin, that kind of breaking of the water. But yeah, this is the case where, the people running the space actually were good friends, still are good friends, and were very generous in allowing me to do whatever it is I wanted. But it was very much like just a white cube. And so as I brought elements here that were true to me, it was kind of about just filling the space while keeping it semi-minimal. I mean, it's pretty extravagant. There's a packed adobe floor, and there's water running through the floor. There's like a little channel that's, again, a story from the hometown. There's portraits of these two younger cousins. There's the plants that we were gardening together in the fashion that I grew up with, where any broken vessel becomes a planter. And so the vessels from previous performances, they're sitting at home in parents' backyard, they become planters. And with the nopal, that's kind of this, going back a little bit to the earlier question about noticing the work even from a distance. This piece in this space, you knew that something was happening even before you ever entered the space, because it's not so obvious from the images, but there is a fire burning on top of this gold nopal. Anytime the show was open, we had a small fire going. And so when you first entered the building, which was kind of like studio spaces and some galleries in this building in LA, you smelled it before you ever knew what you were about to see. And as you did enter the space, the first thing you saw was that floor, like really red floor with a gold object and fire on top of it. So it was, I don't know, it was just this moment of really focusing on bringing this kind of, I don't know, positive, but also, what's the word? It's a challenging conversation, I guess is what I'm trying to say, but bringing it in a way that fills the space with its energy, and that does so in a good way. There's a lot of promise in this work, I thought, but also the folding back of that promise. Yeah, was that too much of a tangent?
No, that was great. Yeah, I think also just thinking about like the sense of imposing on your physical space, and I don't know, also kind of we're getting at this question of sculpture versus architecture, and with Castillos especially, there's like this way that you are invited to be in these spaces, but not necessarily to focus on any particular specific portion of the work itself. But then at the same time, there are these little totems that kind of invite you or pull you to take a closer look. And yeah, some of what I'm hearing is kind of just a little bit of your thinking around like sculpture versus architecture, that sort of thing. And actually, while we're on this slide and talking about this work, I think it'd be great to get into dryness a little bit. Because this feels, very important in a lot of your works, kind of rigidity, dryness. And could you maybe tell us a little bit about how that connects to, these ideas of sound or architecture, however you want to go about it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny we bring up dryness with this one. This piece, this install, did slowly dry out, but there was this little stream running down the gallery that kind of kept wet and was really kind of this contrast. And so maybe with my work and with geography, I guess, going back to that matter, dryness is kind of this seasonal thing. Let me think on that a second.
I think what you're saying also reminds me of. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's going on here as well.
Yeah, that's a good image to kind of gather my thoughts around. I'm a lot of the thoughts around dryness, and I should also point out that it's only in the past few years where like you, Elijah, were one of the first few people who were like, your work is really dry, and I'm like, oh, is it? I'm working with all this wet clay, but you're right, it does dry out, right? It does this process, and so as I started thinking about that, I realized that there was one small work, this one, that was really about that, and so again, it goes back to this question of geography, of movement across landscape, and adding on to it this other layer, this idea of like memory drying up, which is, I don't know, it always brings me to kind of this, I guess, a sad conversation. It's just a fact. I think about the way memory dries up in terms of as folks get older, as folks go on, and new generations just don't have the same memories. And so the reason this is a good piece is because this is a small map I drew of Urequío from walking around one day in 2017, and at coffee and pan and coffee with my aunt and uncle, my oldest living relatives. I don't know, I was super proud of my little drawing. So I was like, hey, tío, my padrino. I was like, hey, padrino, I drew this drawing. And he's like, he didn't think much of it. He looked at it, he's like, some scribbles. I said, no, look, this is Urequío, this is this area, this is La Loma, El Potrero, all these land features I had written in red. And then we started conversing, he and my aunt also, and we started, somehow we got into mapping out the springs in Urequío, which Urequío also, by the way, just in Purépecha means place of the spring. And so Urequío was really built because there were so many springs that happened year-round, and many of them were also seasonal. But we got into mapping out all these little blue dots, which were the permanent springs. And as we're mapping them out, I'm going over my head and I'm thinking, I know this one's dried up. I know this one's been covered up. Like, people thought it was a bad idea to have a water hole, so they cemented it over. And we start to realize that only 1, 2, 3 are left out of many. And it was this kind of really sad realization of the changing landscape and the changing of memory. And so it was my attempt at I need to map this and kind of have this record of it. So in that sense, I don't know, I guess I'm thinking of dryness and in this cycling, in this movement. And maybe that reflects in the works I'm making in the ground cover for Reverberante, in the Castillo's structures, the way the adobe is mixed wet and it dries out and it cracks and it kind of goes through its own process. I'm thinking about it in the way some of the performances that take place are kind of this really dusty kind of moment. I mean, I guess you can attest to it. When we were performing together, I heard you coughing because there was just so much dust being brought up by the stage, by the movement of it. I don't know. Dryness is kind of this interesting thing, physically, but as a metaphor, it's it goes in many directions. This is just one of them. I don't know, but yeah, again, you were one of the first few people who pointed it out and also had a real interest in it. I don't know, can you share with everyone a little bit of that interest in dryness? Yeah, you're super into it, actually.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember, so Armando and I did a performance recently at MASS MoCA, which we collaborated on, and it's called La Seca, which kind of refers to the dry season, dry land, but also kind of a skinny person. It's sort of a caricature, and anyway, I was really interested in, on one hand, this way that Armando uses dust, a lot of dust, with his brother when he does these performances and activates works like Castillos. You can even see here, this is Mitotero, and there's already a lot of this red dust, and some of that is from the broken clay. But I remember when we were planning La Seca, I was like, we need more dust. We need more dust. And I wanted the stage to really kind of have that very to produce that very visceral reaction of people breathing in dust who are in the exhibition space, because I think that's such a significant part of what feels for me like dryness, because I think of the Sonora Desert, where I spent a lot of time growing up, and my association with dust and the way that it's kind of contagious. It sticks to your clothes. It gets all over your shoes. You bring it in to your house with you when you come back home, and it's kind of uncomfortable. But I think with my sound, I try to create like hollowness and a sense of rigidness through sound, and anyway, it was kind of fun to experiment with that with you. And yeah, I wonder if you could even say a little more about your decision to kind of really cake this stage with dust and try to create that atmosphere.
Yeah, I mean, the dust kind of came from the idea of the arena, where like the substrate for sport many times, including for the cockfight. But it was also kind of this thing of if anyone ever goes to like a baile, where it's like out in a sports arena, like in a jaripeo, what's a jaripeo? It's like a rodeo of sorts, but like horses and show and horses dance, but then afterward people dance and people end up covered. It's just dusty. You're breathing in so much dust, and so it was this thing of like of both the moment of like infectiousness and desolation, being out in the desert. That's a whole other story. But then also this moment of like celebration and rejoice and just like fun and just rowdiness, which was more, mitotero was more of that, rowdiness. The term mitotero actually also kind of means something along those lines. So it's kind of this, again, it goes in different directions, but that was kind of the idea with the dust and just kicking it up and letting people kind of like feel the work in their lungs, which, again, going back to geography, like you, I don't know if you travel into these places, like you feel the place, you feel the materiality of that landscape, of the ground in your lungs. If you're on a dry dirt road on the back of a pickup truck, you're feeling that road in your lungs, not just the vibration of the truck, the balance, but you're feeling it in your lungs. And I don't know, it's such a good, crazy feeling. It's not so good for you, but it's good.
There's a way that just really reminds me of, it's so distinct from what visual works can offer. I'm thinking about like sound in relation to dust and things like that, where sound, it kind of enters your body, it enters your ears. You can close your eyes if you don't want to experience the work visually, but you can't really do that the same way with sound. And it's similar with dust, I think. You can't really avoid like feeling it in your body. Anyway, I think we'll kind of have to abruptly wrap it up there because I think we're sort of at time. But is there anything else you wanted to just add, Armando?
No, just my thanks to you, Elijah. We're kind of just scratching at the surface in this conversation. It goes much deeper when we talk one-on-one. But I don't know. I hope that's insightful for you all. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. You can see Armando's work at MASS MoCA in Ceramics in the Expanded Field, which is open until April 10th. You can also see his work in the Open Call exhibition from the Shed, which is happening October 19th. So please check out Armando's work. You can also find it on his website, armandogcortez.com, and follow him on Instagram, Armando G. Cortez. And I also just want to really quickly thank everyone at EMPAC, especially Vic Brooks, for allowing me to put this on. Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Elijah. Are we going to do Q&A or not?
Anyone have any questions?
Do we have time for it?
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah? Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm cool. You okay with that?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Really glad to see you here, Armando. I got to enjoy your work at MASS MoCA. I really noticed all of the elements in it. Also having grown up in the Southwest, I really took all of them in and really appreciated all of that really personal aspect to it. I guess one really interesting thing that I wanted to kind of ask you about was your use of obsidian on the windowsill. And I was like, oh wow, it really brought this interesting aspect of kind of hostility to the space, because on a windowsill you might lean up against it or whatever, but it was like occupied by these really black sharp objects, and I just loved that. So maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, I can talk about that. What's your name?
I'm Aaron.
Do I know you on Instagram? You look familiar.
No, not yet.
Well, thanks for the question, Aaron, or for bringing up that element. It's I should speak into the mic. Yeah, those obsidian shards on those windowsills. They're kind of this little nod to a few different things. It's like extra visual, like it's not even in the work, but there's a little bit of a story, like so many of the works. Why that windowsill, which is actually perfect for like kind of just sitting on, just leaning onto. It's covered with these sharp razor obsidians, right? It just comes from this conversation I had with my mom, like many of the works, where she talked about how we were just talking about like afterlife, and she said something about no place to rest, and I was like, this place looks too comfortable. I think I need to add something that will keep people from resting too much and will make them move around more. And then the other reference to them, that's the shards at the windows there. The other thing is, it's also it's also this kind of borrowing from the aesthetic of a lot of the world, even, because I know a friend of mine from the Philippines. He saw this and he was like, oh yeah, Manila, we do this. It's this kind of like security system where you place broken bottles on the edge of your fence, and it just keeps people from climbing your walls, your fence. And so it's a little like that, where I was like, we've got these columns that are really acting to kind of like create a space on this half of the gallery, but how do I kind of like complete it? How do I make some other elements that's complementary? And that was kind of my response: create this security system at the windows, but also make it so that people aren't just like leaning, I don't know, chatting it up instead of looking at the work. I don't know, maybe in that sense I do impose on people. You mentioned that earlier. But yeah, that's kind of some of the ideas with that. Yeah.
Do I need a microphone or?
If you want, yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
We have rim mics. So they can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please. Armando, thank you very much. First, thank you very much, Elia. Just by looking at the first balance you have in the palenques where the cockfighting takes place, and the elements that are present, like the masks, and also we saw some sandals with blades. Immediately I can think of Michoacán. Michoacán is one of the states of Mexico, and of course cockfighting takes place in Michoacán, in Guanajuato, so I am glad to see these, and of course I also, as a Mexican, to see clay and the water running and the nopal, the cactus, which is also means life in Mexico, not only in Michoacán, but in several states. This is a food, right? And you just throw one piece of the nopal in a very dry area, and then you will have a tree, something like looks like a tree, and then you can eat from that. So I think that I like the way you have expressed the Mexican culture there, and these hidden elements that, as a Mexican, tells me a lot. So it's just a comment more than a question. I believe the blades have to do with the blades that you put in the cocks for cockfighting.
Exactly. Yeah. No, thank you. It means a lot when the audience kind of connects to it in a personal sense, when we share this background, this culture, or these moments, these traditions. With the cockfight, maybe it's disagreeable. It's a strange sport, but I'm glad that comes through for you, and that Michoacán comes through. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Just more of a practical question from an installation perspective. You covered the floor with that adobe. It's hard to tell how thick that is, and then you have the 5-foot columns by 2 foot. Those appear to be pretty heavy elements. Did you have to consider the structural weight-bearing capacity of the floors, or did you just wing it and hope for it?
With these columns, this was kind of this was the basement level of this museum. So there was the whole ground, all of the earth holding that up. If this were to have been a second floor or something, I don't know that I would have gotten away with it. The clay was donated by a local company that still makes sewer pipes out of earthenware. I forget their name, the company, but they donated something like, it was over 3,000 pounds. So it was quite a bit of weight. It was really heavy. With the other piece, Reverberante, we just winged it. This was a friend's space. It was an amazing space titled Visitor Welcome Center. Unfortunately, it burned down a couple of years ago. Not my fault, actually. There was a restaurant below, and their kitchen caught fire, and so they shut down. They've moved on since to other projects. But this was a space that kind of allowed artists to do as they saw needed. And so I mentioned to them, I'm gonna bring a lot of clay. And I collected clay from different places I could get it. It was a lot of weight, but I guess not enough to have affected the structure that the building stood. But that was a great space where I said, I'm gonna cover the floor in clay. They're like, okay. And then I said, I'm also gonna have water running through it the whole time. And they said, okay, that's okay too. And then I said, oh, and I need a fire. And they said, well, okay, we'll have a fire during open hours. I said, yeah, that's all we need. So depends on the space and how okay they are with things. But
Yeah, they really let you go on that one.
Nice. but it's it's that the old saying of better to ask for forgiveness than permission.
Yes.
Sometimes. Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
I have a pretty general, open-ended, and dangerously expansive question. Based on your material, like the adobe, the dust, the cedar wood, even now you just mentioned fire and the water in this particular installation, do you consider your work time-based? Of course, we talk about the history of sculpture, the plastic arts, and whether or not those are time-based. But there is, I feel like you're dealing with the sort of ephemeral surfaces and materials and textures, even something like sound, incidental or otherwise. I don't know. It's you talked about memory, you talked about change. All of these concepts are temporally related. So I wonder if that's something that you take into close consideration. It seems structural, doesn't seem decorative, or simply a mise-en-scène, but even blanks and stuff, that's time-based.
This conversation and kind of leading up to it has made me think a lot about my practice. That's a good question. I don't know. I guess the works are temporal in many instances. I don't know. That is a dangerous and potentially long answer. That's a good question that I'll have to think about more. But I guess I'll just leave it at that. There are moments where I do consider it kind of time-based, and there are moments where I hope the thing lives on. There are moments that are more durable. The cactus, for example, that's like a stoneware. That's pretty durable. Other things are just not practical to continue existing beyond the exhibition, like the whole floor installation, or the structures in Castillos. I don't know. It's this thing of maybe it just goes back to what I mentioned early on, this ingenuity and this need. And so things just need to be made when they are needed, which has been my approach to a lot of my work up until maybe the past 3 years, where I'm always just willing to give things up and make it again. And more recently, speaking with colleagues and my partner, and it's kind of this realization that I'm not going to be around forever to make these things. So I'm like, oh, I need to start thinking of them, even if they do have a temporal element, if they are changing in their existence from wet to dry, from solid to broken. I don't know. I need to start thinking about them a little differently. Maybe not in the way I make them, but in the way that they will live on. Yeah, I'll have to think on that.
I mean, I was going to say that this piece is like extremely performative and this weird kind of like, it does its thing on its own. You know, it's just like, it's very organic in that way, but also artificial. But I had another even more complicated question.
Sure, yeah.
And potentially even more expansive and problematic than what I just asked. You mentioned the Philippines, you're from Mexico. Everything has even kind of the appearance of colonialism. And like and like even just the ingenuity that you talk about. Like, because I'm Filipino, we use whatever we use to do whatever we need to do. And I think that's implicit in your work, but, you know, and I don't mean to say that you need to be explicit about it, but I guess maybe I've already answered my question. It's there, and you probably obviously know that it's there, but like how much of it does it, how much of it do we need to read into your work, or is it sort of like I said, is it sort of implicit?
Yeah, it's very there. I mean, with some of the structures, some of the things, the works, it's a lot about a lot of hybrids, and I think maybe that's a shared kind of cultural thing for Philippines and Mexico. You know, having like the same conqueror. And so I don't know, maybe that ingenuity comes from a place of being colonized. Yeah, I don't know, it's a whole history. In terms of how implicit or explicit, it's, yeah, I don't know. I try not to worry about it too much. I try to just make. There are moments, like, I'll be super honest, and I'll say that I have this kind of list of things I try, or I will never do. I tell myself that I will never do because they kind of become too explicit, they become a little cliche. But in this case, I broke that rule. You know, when I teach students, I talk about, I don't want to see there's a few elements I don't want to see. And actually, nopales, cactus is one of them, because it becomes such a stand-in for, rather than expanding on a feeling or a characteristic or a feature or a culture or a history, all of these things. It can be such a quick stand-in, and it's very quickly read, and it can have some variations in the reading. But in this case, I decided to use it because it was, as was pointed out by Humberto, it's this food that will grow and sustain you. And so I needed this form. For this project, I knew I needed a gold form, but I didn't know what that form was going to be. And in the thinking about it, I thought of the nopal, the cactus, as something that can sustain life, but it's also like pretty lean food. Like, it's not protein, it's not fatty, it's not going to get you really strong and healthy, so to speak. It's enough to keep you alive. It's super resilient, and so it becomes this symbol. And maybe this is like an example of implicit or explicit, where it felt necessary to use this object, this form, as the gold is the promise, but the nopal is a way to like diminish the promise, to say, hold on there, it's not that big of a deal. It's gonna get you by, but it's not gonna, you know, it's not protein, it's not that same substance. And so, yeah, I don't know, yeah, case by case. And you know, earlier I was telling Elijah about a project that I actually pulled from my website because it felt too explicit. It was kind of like important to do it at the time, and it felt good. And in retrospect, I was like, but there was a moment for it, and maybe I'm not sure how to talk to that piece anymore. So it goes back and forth, and yeah, it's a tricky question, but
I mean, I will just say that I think you kind of handle the topic well here, because like I say, it's like, it's there, but it's like, it's not, in a way. It's in the material, and how the material is employed formally, rather than like, this is a cultural signifier that says colonialism, you know what I mean?
yeah, it's, I mean, I guess like in life, it's there. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, my very surface impression on the topic of dryness was that, Elijah, you are approaching it in sort of a positive, or something that you're attracted to, and you are more taking it. I hear you talking about like regret, about something loss, you know, contrasting it with this sort of wetness as life and fertility, and I don't know. Can you complicate that kind of that hot take on your two different relationships to it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm often attracted to a lot of things that don't necessarily feel good, that don't make me feel good or feel nice for other people often. And I don't know, I think like dryness, for me, I associate a lot with like, sonically with like distortion, like heavy distortion feels like a very dry, it feels very crunchy and dry and kind of, and for me, I associate that with life and sort of, I mean, lively, frenetic energy, I guess. And a lot of what I was doing in our collaborative performance was sort of like just creating these distortion kind of things, waves of sound. And Armando, one of the things you said was that reminded you of like electrical power lines that are sort of, that you might look at and imagine the sound of static and kind of buzzing as you're driving, I don't know, like from, what's the highway from like, you know, San Francisco to LA, highway 5, yeah. There's just like all these stretches of nothing but power lines and just sort of desert.
I think it was Highway 10 from like all the Southwest, actually, I guess, LA to San Diego to Arizona, New Mexico. Yeah, but yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I don't know, fertility, all that stuff, I'm not sure about that, but but maybe I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, that is kind of an interesting distinction, but I guess it's kind of like this. Earlier, I mentioned the drying up as just a fact, and so it's kind of just a natural occurrence. Yeah, maybe I talked about it and I make it sound like harsh, which it can be, but it's just it's kind of necessary. Like in ecosystems that have this dry and wet season, it's just, you know, like one is the promise of the other to come. The wet is, you know, just letting you know that it will be dry later, and vice versa. Yeah, I think of it in cycles. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, a lot of, maybe just to quickly wrap that question up, we kind of, our interest converged on like the interest in sort of the desert and the desert in Mexico and all of that. And I think like one of these kind of contrasts that we found, or contradictions, was there is sort of dryness that we associate with the desert, but there's also a lot of life that comes with these very specific, the particular amount of humidity and the particular amount of dryness and all these elements that are in place that wouldn't otherwise provide these particular kinds of life and organisms. And so dryness has this association of lack of, but there's kind of a way that that's maybe complicated. I don't know if you want to add anything to that before we wrap up.
Yeah, I think I would just second that. There's a whole gradation and intricacies, and yeah.
Right on. Well, thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
See you next time.